Going. Hello, everybody, and welcome along to another edition of the Integral Health Podcast with me, Ben Calder. And I'm really honoured today to have with me Emma Last, who is the founder of Progressive Minds and also the Human Reboot Movement. It's a mentoring movement. So, Emma, thank you very much for joining me today. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, a real pleasure. And I should explain to everybody as well. You're catching into this series that we're doing at the moment. These podcasts that are focused around the My 2020 book that is co-authored with Jessica Prime, who is a friend of us both, and Emma is also one of the co-authors within that book as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But that's what's brought us together today. But Emma, I'd really like to start off with you just giving all the listeners a little bit of a potted history of what you do and how you got here. What brought you to this point where you're wanting to support health and well-being in other people?
Fabulous. I work with people that are high achievers, that are often very passionate about the work they do, that are often, dare I say it, work addicted, and really, want to have sustainable performance at what they do, but often are at risk of burnout. So, a lot of the work that I do, I work with both individuals and in workplaces. A lot of the work that I do is around mental health awareness, around stress management, and really kind of that whole prevention, um, and work on mental fitness so that people can really kind of understand how they can build their resilience and perform at their best, whilst we're in a world where we often feel like we want it all. We want the career, we want the balance at home, and people talk about work-life balance, which I often say is a load of bobbins, because we've got a life balance. So how do we get that life balance that we want? But there's a lot of work that goes into that to help people to perform at their best. And that's really kind of the angle that I come at.
Beautiful. I really can't imagine that, that there's any kind of work addiction going on in our society at the moment. It's not like we're constantly bombarded with the ideas of winning entrepreneurs and successfulness in any way that might make us feel like our efforts are not enough, hey?
That is very true. And why do I do what I do is the big question. But I worked for a large corporate for 19 years. I was a senior leader, highly successful, high achiever, work addicted, often on the verge of burnout. But I'd always managed it. I'd always been positioned as being resilient. It was always like, well, what's the next project that we're going to put her on? What else? What's part of her career development? It was always more, 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 more. All whilst trying to balance a family and 3 children. And, did I set out to have 3 children in terms of my mindset and being a career girl? No, not necessarily, but we had twins and a surprise, and I would not change that for the world, because actually they help make me, a more, let's say, rounded person.
Yeah.
I don't mean rounded in the other way. That's bad enough, isn't it? But but yeah, but I think that whole having it all was me.
Yeah.
But it got to a point where there was restructure after restructure and change after change, and I was so passionate about the business. People used to laugh and say, oh, if you cut her open, she'd be blue inside, because that's what the brand colors were. And I really believe that, and I was like, so proud of my achievements. And I was often like held up in lights as well to like new graduates that were brought into the workplace. Look, she's been with us like however many years, 19 years, and she's had, between 13 and 15 different jobs, and you can be like her. You don't need to move on and go and work for different companies. And actually, that part of it was brilliant,
Mm,
and it offered great career progression. But in terms of that culture, it got to a point where almost the label of resilience was a bad thing.
mhm,
It was like, oh yeah, look, they can do that. Or if you last in this business, it's because you're resilient. If you don't,
mm,
it's because you're not resilient enough. And actually, we all go through stuff in our lives. We all go through adversity. We all have to navigate challenge and change.
mm,
But that last time for me, I think the way that it was handled just kind of it put me in a situation where I didn't feel psychologically safe, and I
yeah,
felt that the trust was gone.
yeah,
And as much as I was a senior leader in that business, I just felt really numb.
mm,
And I felt very much under threat. And I became quite cynical and quite negative, which, when I wasn't under pressure in that way, that is not naturally what I am like.
mm,
And I didn't really like who I was kind of becoming, if I'm really
mm,
honest. And I just thought, do you know what? Something has got to change. And so um, I made the decision pretty much, within a couple of months of the restructure. I was really lucky. I think out of about 8 of us, there was only 3 that were kept. The rest was, existing people within the other brand where the 2 brands were kind of merged together. So I should have felt really grateful, that I
mm,
had this promotion and this new job, but I just didn't.
mm,
And I think for me, core values have always been really, really important. And for me, at some point, something happened where those values were crossed. And, I always kind of said to the people that I managed, look, if we've got the same values and we've got the same purpose, we can get through anything together because we're all on the same mission and we're working towards the same thing. But it just felt for me that those core things had changed, and I had to start thinking about moving on. It did take
mm,
me a while. I did tell them sort of in the November that they tried to persuade me to kind of stay. And then by the January, it was kind of a bit more mutual that, it was agreed that I needed to move on. But by that point, I was really poorly.
yeah.
By that point, I had burnout.
So
And
when you kind of look back on that career over those 19 years, I mean, it sounds to me that you're describing a culture that is inherently at its core very unhealthy. And when you look back at it now, do you see that was an unhealthy culture to be in right from a very early stage, and treating you almost like a commodity that they were looking to wring the most out of, and that if you weren't resilient, if you weren't kind of surviving that treatment, that you were considered as a substandard product.
unfortunately, that is part of the sector that I was in.
Yeah.
And, when you like last night, I was being like really nosy, but last night I thought, "Do you know what? I've heard such mixed things. They've done better this year on, top 100 companies, but we would
Mhm.
always kind of get in top 100 companies, but it didn't mean to say it's like on the surface we did lots of things, but it didn't mean that the inherent culture was right.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so, and that for me was, so I thought, I'm just going to do a bit of digging and just see, just out of curiosity, because for me, I would love that to have changed because I
Mm.
don't want what happened to me to carry on happening to other people. I had seen it happening over the years, but it was a bit like I'd been indoctrinated in some way to think,
Yes.
well, they're weaker.
Yeah, yeah. That was
So
exactly what I was feeling in there, was that sense that I mean, it's probably not a good comparison, but I'm almost feeling like a bit of a Wolf of Wall Street type energy that, if you're not part of that crowd, then you just need to be kind of got rid of. And, if you're not in that vein and in that movement, that really your value to the company is not there.
Well, or you would be moved into a role that was of less value.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, we always talked about people being in the right seats and things like that. But um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, it looks on the surface that things, are better.
Hmm.
Um, what prompted me to look was I saw a review on another brand which was quite publicly a craft beer brand,
Hmm.
where ex-employees had written a letter, and I thought, goodness me, there'd be quite a few of us that would love to do that.
Yeah.
Do you know? But um, but I thought, do you know what? Actually, I really hope that that has changed. And rather than talking the talk, actually, they are walking the walk. But
Yeah.
I think, that has got to come from, you know, that that change of, I was often criticized for being kind of too connected to my people or too
Right.
human a leader.
Wow.
And that for me was like, this is where you don't fit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's really important. It's a massive part of a lot of the work that I do now is around, when people don't feel like they belong or don't feel like they're included, you know, and the actually diverse thinking, different people, different ways of expressing or talking about feelings. We have to be careful when we're creating a culture that we don't get to a point where we have people that can't express their emotions or don't feel psychologically safe, because
Yeah.
this is where we start to lead people down a path of mental illness.
Yeah.
Because we all know that, those when you don't fit and you don't feel like you belong, it does cause stress, and
Yeah.
and one thing leads to another, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course, and we see it so much now that there is so much more depression in the world and in the workplace because people are not doing jobs that feel purposeful and valuable in the greater sense of our community, and they don't feel valued within the roles that they're offering, and the traditional kind of rational corporate structures, see people as parts of a machine, but without any real true emphasis in the culture of the relationship in there. And yet, in contrast, you've had systems like holocracy that have developed over the last kind of 10, 15 years that review and use business in a completely different way that makes the individual and their gifts and their talents a central part of how a company moves forward, while being able to respect and care for how they feel within that role at the same time.
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, after I did finally kind of get out, as I put it, which was a real kind of big decision to make, because I was like, I've always been a girl. My husband's always been really supportive, and I've been the breadwinner. So, for us really to kind of make that decision, it was a bit like, well, what are we going to do?
Mm,
Um, but my dad said something to me as well that stuck in my mind. He'd not been like that well, which kind of was triggering, things a little bit in my mind, around his health. But he said to me, if you carry on working the way you are, and being run ragged, you're not going to make it past 45, Emma. And for me, that was just like, do you know what? This isn't worth it. It's not worth it. The reason I do what I do is because, you know, I want a great family life, and I want, time with my kids, and my husband and my family, wider family, they're my everything. And that was, my huge driver for I did what I did. But
Yeah.
so as I left, and I actually got worse before I got better. And
Yeah.
that's really where the human reboot came from,
Yeah.
because I had to reboot myself. I had to pause and really reflect on what the hell was going on with me. You know, we've not even got, I'm not even bloody ordered anything.
Okay. So you'd kind of, you'd left the corporate life, things had started to kind of go downhill for you. You realized that you needed to reboot yourself to kind of change your thinking patterns and how you felt about yourself in work. Where did that take you through to?
Okay, so I wasn't in a great place. It was right, okay, do I go down the route of going to the GP, or do I try my best to kind of dig deep? And I had always had tools in my kit bag. My life hadn't always been easy. I dealt with challenge and change and adversity and grief and all the way, through my life. So it's not that I didn't have tools in my kit bag to be able to deal with it, but I just couldn't understand why. Why was I not able to deal with this in the same way? So it was just, I absorbed myself in learning. That's where I started. And really, where I'd been so aware of my kind of how I should behave in a work environment, I didn't always get it right. The real Emma now and again came out, if that makes sense. But but and also, probably having to behave in that way sometimes meant that I perhaps maybe reacted and didn't respond in the way that perhaps I might have wanted to.
Sure.
But I just suddenly became very self-aware and aware of the fact that actually all this development I'd done all over the years had all been career development. And actually, what about me? And all this time and effort I put into my career, and all this time and effort I put into, my kids, what was I doing for me?
Yeah.
When did I actually stop? And the first thing that I learned to do was learn to pause. And I had to work through, all those fears around pausing and actually what would happen if I did.
Yeah.
And that's, so that's really where the reboot came from, because, you have to switch off to switch back on again.
Sure.
And then all of these, so I started to then kind of work through understanding all around well-being. It wasn't just something that I made up in my head. I researched into various different methodologies and, did different qualifications and things like that, and used research to really kind of implement it on myself.
Yeah.
And just understanding stress, more around CBT. It's basically, I coached myself and mentored myself through the whole process. Now, looking back on things, would it have been easier for me to kind of go to someone else and for them to perhaps show me what to do? Maybe. It might have been a quicker recovery, but actually all of that and all of those pieces that then came together, I started my own business it was between sort of March, April time. The ideas were formulating, and it was very much about supporting organisations who were transitioning through change, because that's what I'd done a lot of in my previous business, and I'd worked on various projects and things. So, but it was coming more from actually what tools can we share? How can we help them to go through that change? And then, and then out of that, I then ended up doing a wellbeing coaching qualification. I'd coached people for, close to 20 years. So that all kind of came out of that, and built the wellbeing part built on top of that. And then from that, the Human Reboot Movement was born, really. And I started with my wellbeing coaching, really. It was coaching one-to-one to begin with, but then as I saw that people sometimes needed that mentorship rather than coaching, and that training and tools in their kit bag, that's when it came formulated into the Human Reboot Movement. So really, that's where I deal with individuals who pretty much maybe are like me, or can see traits of themselves in how I was.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm perfect now by any means, but
Sure.
and that's one thing that I talk to people about. Just because you work in this field doesn't mean to say you're perfect.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to make as well, is often people kind of have that view that those of us who are already working in health and health support, that we're pure as a driven snow and we've got it all sorted. But I think if anything, the opposite is true. We're the working model, and we're the people who are maybe just 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of where some of our clients are. And the reason that we're ahead in that sense is that we've already made that journey, and we're kind of seeking that way, and people who are seeking their way find that resonance with what we're doing, and we can use some of our experience and our understanding to really support them in their journeys as well. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. So my purpose that I had for many years that was within that business, I refound it by supporting others, in what I do now. And that for me was, it took me a bit of time to refind that purpose. But yeah, a huge part of well-being is having a purpose and being able to um live life to the full, really.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then we've spent the last, what now, 15 months just about in my mind, one of history's weirdest kind of changes in culture and in behavior that certainly I've been aware of in my lifetime. Notwithstanding that in various parts of the globe there's been other very strange situations, but there's a part of me that's almost seeing some of it like an apartheid type situation where we're being forced to stay in, and there are very interesting rules around what we shouldn't, can't do. So, so my next question really is what's been the challenge for you in your role, and how have you navigated what's been happening over the last kind of 14, 15 months?
Okay, so pretty early on, I knew realistically that it was gonna be bad. I probably from January, February time, I was like, we need to lock down. We need to lock down. Why is no one getting this? No one's getting this.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is one of the ladies that I trained who was working in China.
Mm.
So she was over there and I could see what they were doing. She was like, I was asking her loads of questions and she was posting like daily what they were doing. So they had to be like tested. They had to go for testing all the time. They couldn't go inside anywhere without being tested before they went in.
Mm.
They had really strict lockdown. They were only allowed out on, say, 2 days a week, and they could go out. It was really strict in terms of when they could go out for exercise.
Mm.
And what was quite amazing in terms of the timescales, it was probably within about 3 months they were letting them start to return to work,
Yeah.
because they got this massive testing, lockdown and testing system everywhere. But we had none of that, did we?
Yeah.
And also the masks, etc. We didn't have it. So quite early on, I was like, we need to be doing more. We really need to be doing more. And also with my parents, I was just like, it's on that. I remember the Monday night when the announcement came. It was, we're advising you in your, if you're kind of, was it 65 plus something, or 60 plus, to stay in. So that for me, that worry about my mum and dad and things was, that was kind of it was like, I was like, this is real. This is getting serious. I've seen it happen. I've seen what they're doing over there. We are not locking down quick enough. So in
Mm.
my head, that's kind of where I was at. So um and the biggest challenges for me really were right at the beginning, because it was almost like I had the week that we were going into lockdown. I think, was that about the 20 something of
23rd of March was
March?
our
Yeah.
start date for
So
that. Yeah.
I had a 3-day train the trainer, like mental health and wellbeing train the trainer course booked in London, hotel booked, and obviously hotels in London are expensive. Um, so for me, it was just like, can that course go ahead? And seeing the numbers in London rising, we had to make a call. I think it was that Tuesday morning, we made a call, or the Monday morning, we made a call that was like, actually, the right thing to do is not to go into London. We were still allowed to, but was actually, it's not the right thing to bring those people together and do it.
Yeah.
So that was financial impact on me. And it was a big course that we'd been advertising for probably 5 months.
Yeah.
It was worth a lot of money to me,
Yeah.
that potentially probably would have kept me going for 2 or 3 months, just that
Yeah.
one piece of work.
Yeah.
So I was just like, okay, but it's fine, because that January was my best month ever so far in the business. I was working with workplaces, and my coaching, and training had just taken off, because I was then into my second year of business. I was flying, really, earning, potentially going to be earning more than I was working for the corporate. It was like,
Yeah.
this is amazing. I've got this life that I love, doing the work that I love. And then the thing for me as well was, I'm a governor of a school, and I was so after that Monday night announcement, I decided to drop my son off that next morning and then go and speak to the head teacher in the playground. And I said to her, what actions have you taken since last night? And she said, I've basically told 4 members of staff that are higher risk that they need to work from home.
Yeah.
It's like, fine. So that's been dealt with. She was amazing. She was absolutely amazing. And she just said, we're so scared.
Yeah.
We're so scared. And I just said to her, because at this point the communication with schools was terrible. They didn't know what was happening. It was very short notice. So all of that was just, and I remember I just said, I think you've got to plan for school closure. And she went, this Friday, possibly next Friday at the latest. And I said, yeah, I'd agree with that. If not soon. She went, but realistically, I think it's going to be sooner. Do you? And I said, yeah, I do. And she just said, the staff are so scared. We don't. We're running out of hand sanitizer. It was just like, it was all of those feelings. It was such the unknown, wasn't it? So that whole morning, so I'd had that cancelled. I had a client that I rang that owed me quite a lot of money. I phoned them and asked them when they would be paying. They said, I'm really sorry, but basically we've got to make sure that we pay our staff first before we pay you, because at that point we didn't know whether we were going to get any financial support or not, as businesses. And we didn't really know what would happen, or, all my business was pretty much face-to-face business. It wasn't online. My coaching was face-to-face. I had some online stuff, but not, it was probably 10-15% of my business. So, and I just remember walking back to my car and thinking, I've gone from being in a situation where my business is like that, and I don't even need to worry about 3 months in advance
Yeah.
to, if that money doesn't come in, I'm screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, which I think has been a fear for a lot of people, isn't it? Is actually how are they going to survive through this very uncertain period? So what advice have you been giving to your clients? How have you been supporting them through this process?
Um, Really, a lot. It's been very kind of individual dependent. Um, what I have tried to get them to think about, which has helped a lot, is that viewing this change, and for whatever period, is to understand that they are, we have been going through a period of loss. So we've lost freedom, perhaps lost finances, jobs, social contact. And when you start talking about, when you talk about grief, grief is loss. And so if they're struggling to understand why they're feeling the way they are, that often by viewing what they're going through, in terms of some sort of change curve, or viewing it as, actually, the reason why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling is because actually I'm going through a period of grief here.
Yeah.
And not to be so hard on yourself, and to just, talk about your emotions, write those emotions out, don't keep it in, and, just put one foot in front of the other. But on the other hand, it's been real a lot of education around well-being, and actually how do they get healthy boundaries in the work that they're doing, and also in terms of like well-being itself. So because people, talk about well-being, well, just get out in nature and go for a walk, and that's brilliant. But actually, or, oh, I'm going for a bath and putting some bubbles in a bath, sometimes when you're going through this kind of stuff, that is not enough.
Yeah.
So it's just that kind of whole education piece around that, and also trying to get them to understand that in terms of well-being, you've got a number of different factors. You've got social, financial, psychological, what, I can't even remember what else. Oh, physical.
Yeah.
You've got all these different elements, social, and actually, if you imagine our well-being as a Jenga tower, we've had all those pieces pulled out over the past, 15 months, and
Yeah.
pulled out quite hard in some cases, or pulled out all at the same time. So sometimes it's no wonder you feel like crap.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, really, how deeply we've been affected, and that kind of leads into you having been invited by our mutual friend Jess Prime to join in with my 2020 book project. So tell me about your part in that as well.
Okay, so a huge a, a huge way that I have dealt with my emotions, and to learn to get out of my head what's in it, is to write. And so I generally write every day, and that might be that I write something and it's the right thing to post out on social media because it might help other people, or or it could be that it's more of a diary and it's just a diary entry to me. But basically, it's journaling in essence. And to me, that, when I needed it has really helped me over the last sort of 4 years to really understand, um, and connect with my emotions when I kind of had to be in a situation where I didn't have time for any of that. And so yeah, so that's kind of the how I ended up writing it the way I did, because basically it's just excerpts of like my diary from last year,
Yeah.
and it's just really journaling my way through 2020,
Yeah.
and it talks about the highs and the lows, and some like lovely little, like there was one day I wrote, I wrote a letter to my children. And it's like when I went so it was really difficult in some ways because I'd written so much, I didn't realize I'd written so much. And
Yeah.
Jess was just like, this is a book in its own. And I had to, so by the time I'd pulled it all together, it was about 15,000 words. So I had to chop it down. I hadn't realized that I'd written so much. But then we chopped it down. So it's like it's excerpts of my journaling diary really for last year, and just some poignant points really about, trying to juggle homeschooling and, how I transition my business online. Um, George Floyd and how that kind of made me kind of stop and stand still and make me think, actually, do you know what, things do need to change. And what can I do? That was probably the start of my allyship journey, really. And that's not necessarily massively featured in the My 2020 book because I couldn't fit it all in. But but there's little excerpts really, and and at the end, really, it's really about hope and gratitude and trying to move forward into 2021 as a new decade.
Yeah, I like that. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And for those of you listening, the My 2020 book is a series of co-authors speaking about how they found their way through the year. So you'll be able to get that from July, I believe, and it'll be available from Amazon and other good book retailers. So Emma, thank you. I've really enjoyed listening to your story and what you've been doing over your life, really, to get yourself to this point today. So, but I'd like to ask you for our listeners for your top tip. We're talking about human reboot. We're talking about not addiction to work and kind of changing that. So what would be your one tip if anybody was going to hear this today? What would be your one tip that you would want to give to them to improve their work-life balance?
I would say ask yourself how you switch off so that you can switch on and perform at your best.
Beautiful. That's such a simple question, but with such depth and nuance to it. I absolutely love that. So Emma, if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to find you, give us some websites, give us some spaces where people can get to you, please.
Okay. So I also have my own podcast called Human Reboot. And you can find me at thehumanrebootmovement.com. It doesn't have www in front of it. It's really weird. So just the humanrebootmovement.com. So you can find downloadable free resources and how to connect with me on socials on there. And if you are a workplace wanting, support, in your workplace, progressive-minds.co.uk. But that does have a www dot in front of it.
Perfect. And for anybody listening, all of the links will be down in the description, so you won't have to try and decipher the www dots or not. We'll put them in there for you, so you'll be able to connect through to Emma's work nice and quickly and easily there. So Emma, thank you so much for joining me on this Integral Health podcast today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
I have absolutely loved it. Thank you very much for inviting me, Ben.
No problem. And we'll look forward to another edition of the Integral Health podcast at some point in the near future. Keep your ears out ready for it. Thank you, everybody. Look after yourselves. Be well. Stay healthy. And that's me, Ben Calder, Integral Health Podcast, signing off for today. Take care. Bye-bye.